Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the finale of dealing with communist fan fiction.
Finally, it's almost over.
Episode 3 of The Iron Heel. With me, again, the same masochists as I have before. I've got Justine.
Ow, ow.
I've got Freelance.
I'm here of my own volition.
Brandig.
Good morning from Texas.
And Quackhouse.
Why are we doing the most streams on arguably the worst book? Hello.
Yes, moving briefly on from that comment. Well, look, we've had some interesting.
I'm joking. Carry on.
Last stream, we went on a very interesting tangent, I think, on the differences between Catholicism and Protestantism. So anything not relating to the book has been great conversation.
Yeah.
Just a shame they have this source material. So, starting off where we left off, we were on chapter 10. So does anyone want to give a summary up to where we are now? If they can piece together where we are now.
Someone else will have to do it. I wasn't here last.
So he's just had his conversation with the small business owners, Ernest, this is. And I think in the next couple of chapters, what we're going to be seeing is the censoring of the book published by Evelyn's. It is Evelyn, isn't it?
No, it's Davis. Davis is father.
Yeah,
right?
Sorry, I always mix up those two names when I'm reading this. By her father, and we're going to see the bishop disappear and then make a return. So, as before, I'll just flick through, and then whenever anyone has anything that they want to bring up, just tell me to pause. I don't think on this chapter there's anything particularly of interest.
We're actually back into a little bit of plot as opposed to just dialogue, right?
Yeah, there's not these sorts of soliloquies or just absolute rhetoric pieces for a while. It is actual plot narrative going forward for a little bit. So we have her father publishing a book, and then we'll go through the censoring of the book.
His father being cancelled, effectively.
Yes, yeah. So this is where you see Jack London understanding power from a less of a political standpoint and more, I suppose, just a power politique sort of view with the censorship of material. Because obviously we see it now from one side happening to another, but being written in 1907, I could believe that perhaps it was on the flip side then.
And maybe this is just what happens with power, to some degree, like powerful people crush their enemies.
Yeah, and I think that censoring of ideas that are not becoming of the power structure is probably a common theme we see. Regardless of the politics of the state.
But I think what we can glean from that for today is that the left are in fact in power, whatever they, and they were before when Trump was president as well, because they're the ones who could have the power to cancel people.
Yeah, I think Brandig was making a point. I think someone was trying to. I think someone was trying to.
I was so
Freelance.
This all looks very much like how the Tsarist, what can I call it, regime? The Tsars in Russia basically oppressed all their political enemies because they were dealing with a lot of proto-revolutionaries, and this is basically a retelling of that. So people were writing books and they were oppressed, and it's just projected onto the United States.
We have a mention of the Black Hundreds who were active in Tsarist Russia, but I don't think they ever, in fact, came to America. So it's kind of interesting that what he's doing here, claiming that the Black Hundreds are active, this reactionary kind of bunch.
Yeah,
this is where
it takes on a new meaning now.
Yeah, this is where London actually diverges significantly from actual history. where he anticipates and describes a massive set of strikes and revolts and counter strikes and strike breakers and the degeneration into violence that never actually occurred.
Yeah, it's probably fair to say that chapter 10 is where we go off on a tangent of alternative history. There's a particular quote relating to the Black Hundreds that just made me laugh, given where we are. The Black Hundred, no, where is it? So convincing was all this misrepresentation that even sincere ministers in the pulpit praised the Black Hundreds whilst regretting the necessity for violence. We don't even see that happening now.
They don't even regret the necessity.
No, there's not even a regret for violence. It's actively encouraged. So
yeah, I mean, they won't denounce it, will they?
Are you comparing Black Lives Matter to the Black Hundreds, perhaps?
Yes, I just change hundreds to hundreds of thousands, and I think you probably got an accurate.
Well, no, they use the thing. Do you condemn the violence? They'll say, I condemn all violence. So this violence, I condemn all violence. So this violence, no, I condemn all violence. And it's like, yeah.
Well, that's only the ones that are trying to weasel out of giving a definitive answer on praising it. But is it Maxine Waters?
Maxine Waters.
Yeah. I mean, she doesn't care. She'll tell you to harass anyone that isn't progressive, and face no consequences for this. So
well, that's because her seat is safe.
Mm-hmm. So I just
now,
found
if she actually got expelled from Congress or something, and her congressional pension was removed, then she might change her story, or someone else similar to her might change their story. But until and unless that happens, there's no political consequences or even real practical consequences.
I think at this point, Maxine Waters is not really worried about her pension. I think she's set for life by now. So,
yes, I just on the Russia. Jackie London uses Russia as a way of comparing what's happening in the States quite a lot. And I do find it quite entertaining that he does that, given what happens a couple of decades after this is published. He seems to make reference to Russia a lot as an example.
That's reactionary country crushing.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, he spent a lot of time up in the Yukon, and there were a lot of Russians up there as well as Americans, because it was right next to the eastern part of Russia.
Yeah. They settled that area even before the Americans did, or the English did.
Yes. So just going forwards, what we also see happening, aside from the censoring of books, is fortifying of elections. And Ernest essentially says that violence is the only response to the fortification of elections, which is, again, let's not draw contemporary examples, but
one of the interesting things about that fortification of the elections is that London made another prediction that was flat out unrealized with respect to the actual victories in elections. So there may have been, I don't recall any particular passages that say that the elections were strongly fortified, but there were victories by the Communist Party in the American elections sufficient that they actually managed to get a majority when joined with another party. So that's fanciful on the face of it.
Yes, well, he says that they've earned the seats, but the Iron Heel won't give them up. They're not willing to step down and allow a peaceful passing of the baton.
But the other thing they do is, it's probably earlier in the book with the bishop. If someone says something that doesn't fit, they'll say they're mad and everything they're saying is, just crazy talk and lock them up. And
that's just about to come up after this now.
kick them out of society. Sorry. Right. I can't remember the bit where the bishop was before that.
So we also see a huge increase in some of the footnotes as well going forward.
Yeah, what do you think it means that Marx had to be footnoted for future reference? Like they don't take it for granted that Marx will be sort of like a hero, everybody's
Deified.
Yeah, the way he was, say, in Russia 20 years later.
It might be that there's already a lot of internal critique on it. It's like they're constantly trying to square the circle when it comes to Marx and how to apply it. So that's also why you have the schism in between the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks. I mean, who can interpret it correctly?
Is that what the schism was over? The correct interpretation, Marx?
Oh, well,
Another thing.
The Great Schism.
It feels to me something like a Protestant church. So you have this. There's no strict dogma. So it's kind of split the church because you can't decide how many times you should pour water on a child when it's baptized, stuff like that.
Right, your own church.
Yeah, I'll make my own church with drugs and.
Well, I think part of the schism between Bolsheviks and Mensheviks was whether they thought they could co-opt the existing power structure to implement the communist revolution, and whether they thought that they just needed to take direct action.
Yeah, it's always something like that, and then they start to squabble and it falls apart. So
well, it didn't fall apart.
Well, the
violent, bloody revolutionaries won.
Yeah, but
violence and revolution.
Not in a constructive way.
Well, that's very rarely what happens in a revolution.
Yeah.
So were the Mensheviks less? Did they advocate violence less than the Bolsheviks?
I think so. I think they were the ones that were trying to basically redirect the ship of state, whereas the other group wanted to overturn it and sink it.
They were progressives then, maybe. The theory that you might get where you want to go gradually as opposed to through revolutions. That's the way I understand progressives.
I can never remember which one. One of them wanted to focus on the populace, and one of them wanted to focus on the elites. I can never remember which way around it is. I feel like Mensheviks were the more elitist group, but I might be wrong on that.
It would fit with Trotsky.
Yeah. That's what I'm thinking. Yes, well, obviously, Jack London doesn't show revolution occurring in this way just yet, because first we have an international protest of workers around the globe going for a picnic, which is obviously going to happen and isn't completely fanciful.
Yeah, this is what I don't understand about international socialism. It's that somehow I, as a blue-collar worker, should care about blue-collar workers in different nations. Like there's some kind of universal brotherhood. Well, these same blue-collar workers are trying to bash each other's skull in at every soccer match when they meet one of these workers from another town.
That's literally the era that they're in. It makes reference to them being in the era of the Brotherhood of Man. So that's what he's getting at.
Yeah.
And we had happen a few years back. MacDonald in the Labour Party tried to allow for any kind of unionization and what's the word I'm looking for? Protesting, essentially, in solidarity to any other nation when they have a protest. He wanted to allow unions to.
Oh, I see.
To protest in line with other nations in solidarity.
They'd be like non-stop protests, essentially.
Yeah, that makes
the French, I mean, would
zero
just
sense.
Drive everyone mad then, wouldn't they?
Well, yeah, exactly. Gilets jaunes. I'm going to protest in solidarity. I mean, maybe that would be a good idea, but
Lately, I've had more sympathy with this sort of tendency in the French. If it could be channeled the right way, like the Gilets jaunes seem a bit more promising.
Yeah, I think the problem with them is that no one on the outside knew what the hell they were, what their movement was, other than some vague notion of not liking green energy, so they're evil. Like I don't know. It wasn't well established. They didn't have any face of the movement to give it an identity other than what the media would say that they were.
Yeah, they kind of were protesting that they got a bill for some elitist ideals. So like we don't care really that much about the environment on the short term, but they did have to pay for it an exorbitant amount. They tried to do the same thing here in the Netherlands, where they at first were going to reduce the amount of buildings that were allowed to be built. Because they wanted to reduce the amount of nitrogen that was emitted, and then they shifted that to the farmers, and in the end they reduced the maximum speed of motor cars to 100 kilometers out during the daytime, and people would protest that, but then COVID hit, so we kind of stuck with it.
Right.
But it's just passing the buck to the workers, to the people who basically get to vote, and on issues where you basically don't have any choice. So it feels like oppression. So I understand why they would like suddenly start striking out and trying to basically have a counterweight against the government.
It's interesting because it did seem like a grassroots kind of uprising, as opposed to a lot of these other protest movements.
It was odd because the right and the left both were protesting at the same time, because everybody was mad at Macron. And the result is, as far as I understand, is that Macron nowadays has taken a very right-wing position, where he basically says, well, France is France, and if you're not French, you should go. And being French is an identity, which resulted in the recent, they call it a coup d'état, but it's just a letter from the people in the military saying, oh, if things don't improve, the military might have to take action.
Yeah.
Which never happened before, right? So somewhere in Brunner in 1804 or something around that region.
Was that the Napoleonic thing?
Yeah, it's a Napoleonic thing.
Just that thing, that little thing.
That little thing.
Hey, I'm an American, so it's European history ain't my thing, baby.
The after the French Revolution, they changed the names of the months. So you have Thermidor, which is the hottest month, and Brunner, which is some month. So usually, if somebody says the month of Brunner, you instantly know it's like, okay, it's that period where they try to change everything after the French Revolution.
Yeah, year zero kind of policies, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, they literally changed it to year zero and tried to implement a 5-day week because it was grounded on rationalism and trying to make everything.
The Bible, right?
Well, yeah, that exactly. And then I think that was the idea behind the Stalin's, or it may have been Lenin that implemented it, the 10-day week. They literally took it directly from the French Revolution, if memory serves.
They tried to make everything decimal, so they had like 10 hours with 100 minutes and things like that. And some of those things stuck, so that's how we got the metric system. Yeah, because Napoleon standardized it over everything he conquered, so that's why the UK doesn't have it. But the metric system does have parts of it which actually make sense when you have to convert things from sizes to volumes and things like that. But the really strange stuff they got rid of. So
was he planning to slow down the rotation of the Earth?
I think ultimately they would do that in order to make.
They would try. Don't put it past them.
Oh, just the planets around the sun, just
deorbit the moon to get everything stable.
Well, yeah, the orbit of the moon is reactionary, so.
Yeah, you have to deorbit it, so you take it out of orbit, put it somewhere in the Pacific Ocean or somewhere.
And the tides, don't even get me started on the tides.
Yeah, how do they work? Tide goes in, tide goes out. Nobody knows.
Just don't swallow the pods.
Yeah.
that was so many references in a 5-second clip. All right, let's carry on.
Can't say we don't have our fingers on the pulse. Is
What about 5 years ago, talking about
Yeah.
Tide Pods and Tide goes in, Tide goes
It
out.
feels so distant 5 years ago, like 2015. If you look at it, like the completely alien world.
just listen to the children. That's all I say.
Hey, I still think 2000
Think of
was
the
last
children.
year.
It was a good year. It was all right.
2000.
Yeah, it was all right. Yeah.
It's a lot better than a lot of the ones since. I can tell you that much.
Prince is still alive.
Well, there's that.
But how many good songs did he really do?
So another thing that we see coming up.
Moving on.
We see some more Mary Suism with her father constantly talking about how great Ernest is, and how
So dreamy.
yeah,
He's a
how
great
muscular
man.
he is, and just
A
an
great-
all-round great guy, and
great
everything he says is
great-
true.
Such a thick neck.
Did I mention that he was a great man?
You know how Tarantino has a thing for feet? I do wonder if Jack London had a sort of neck fetish, as he seems to just constantly make reference to that on Ernest. But
Maybe he thinks that
ca-
he literally thinks that's what women want in a man, just nice thick neck.
And the rest just all skinny.
Albion, can I say something about the book, or are we still doing tangents?
What?
oh no, oh yeah, what book?
What I noticed here is that Ernest is threatening with violence, and that's the second time actually that happened. So the first time he didn't threaten with violence, but he pushed people into a position where they had to do that. So he really seems to be the agitator of everything. Like if you take Ernest out and just start talking and gradually starting to change things, things don't get that violent. So yeah.
Yep. There's a constant theme of it's okay when we do it, because the word propaganda is used, and obviously it was a little bit more objective then. So we shouldn't look at it as being a negative connotation when he talks about how effective their propaganda is. But they talk about subversion towards the end, which we'll cover soon, hopefully, once we can get through some tangents. They're talking about infiltrating institutions and subverting them, and also setting up false flag events to cause conflict. But it's all justified for the greater good.
And that's the problem, for the greater good.
The greater good.
The greater
The
good.
greater good. Right. So what else have we got in this section? The only other thing I think I wanted to mention on as we go through this.
The ridiculous poem.
That, yeah. So let's go to that. So this is also an interesting little, where is it? Reference to a man feeling like a god. There we are. His contention was that it was finer for a finite mortal speck of life to feel godlike than for a god to feel godlike. That sums it up, really. If you remove heaven, then people try to put heaven on earth, and this is what you end up with. The greater good is always justified, because why would you not be able to sacrifice anyone and everything to have utopia?
Well, it's more than that. It's the condemnation of God for not being God. The communist rejection of any God is done so with the express sentiment of hubris by man. Fundamentally, it's just saying, I am man, I have will, I am exerting my will on the world. If you are God, why aren't you exerting your will on the world? And since it doesn't appear to communists that God is exerting will on the world, then even if God exists, God doesn't deserve to be God, because God is not exerting will. Since to communists, will is everything.
So to summarize it, God does not solve my problem, so I reject him. I need another daddy.
It's not even that. It's God is not commanding. God is not challenging. God is not enforcing and enacting his will. God is not acting. Therefore, since I act, I reject God.
Well,
Because
Brandig, you have to consider the possibility that God does not like you. He never wanted you. In all probability, he hates you. It's not the worst thing that could happen. What am I calling back to? 5 points.
The first rule is that we do not talk about that.
Very good. No, I agree.
Suggesting that God has a skinny neck.
I'm sorry, I forgot about that book by a degenerate about degenerates for degenerates.
Hey,
Yes. So let's get back to this book by a degenerate. Well, no, actually, that's. I don't know if I'll go that far with him. All right, Brandig, you wanted to go on to the poem. Did you want to?
I didn't want
talk
to
about it.
This is London basically saying, I am a great poet, and here's the encapsulation of everything I think is great. And then he basically gives a high school level poem here.
Bring the leaves upon my knees.
Yeah. So the man you drove from Eden's grove was I, my lord, was I. And I shall be there when the earth and the air are rent from sea to sky. For it is my world, my gorgeous world, the world of my dearest woes, from the first faint cry of the newborn to the rack of woman's throes.
What is that cadence called? There's a specific name for
is
that.
it iambic pentameter?
No.
That's the Shakespearean. Yeah. I mean, whenever you're coming to writing a poem, that is the first tune that people instantly get drawn to. It's quite, GCSE.
Yeah.
I
don't know. But it's just basically rejection of God and supplanting God with man.
Mm-hmm.
In a poem that could have been written by a precocious artistic soul in about 10th grade.
Yes.
Wasn't it? There was a British Marxist historian, I think it was Eric Hobbs, who, when interviewed about Stalin's many murders and purges and mass killings and so on, in 2010 or something, said it was worth it. I just think this is characteristic of these people.
Well, the whole movement, Marx was a failed political science student. Hitler was a failed political science student. Stalin was a failed political science student. It's...
Patterns are emerging. And
Ho Chi Minh was a failed baker.
Castro was a failed baseball player.
All these artistic souls that have been stifled in their pursuit of art and weren't embraced by the people, it's just purely born of resentment, it seems, which is exactly what is expressed in whenever they get power. It's envy and resentment of the successful by the incompetent, incapable, insouciant.
Yeah, be careful of be wary of the weak man, I guess.
Weak men look for saviors. Strong man saves himself.
Yeah, I think the glorification of envy is at the heart of it, and it's to say just taking a vice and making a philosophy out of it, or making
the exchanging of virtue for vice and vice versa.
I mean, LaVeyan Satanism is essentially the morality of today.
Yeah.
And speak of the savior comes the bishop.
Not the bishop.
Yes. So going back to our conversation last week, this is sort of why I think it's not a direct attack specifically on religion, but here you see him being sympathetic to the bishop, and and funnily enough, when I was rereading it earlier, when I was trying to make the point that I think it's a more Protestant sympathetic than Christian sympathetic, later on he does say that the Catholic Church was trying to suppress the proletariat. So just further evidence that he was anti-papist.
Well, this is an American telling this tale, so he doesn't have the massive experience of internecine conflict between and amongst various sects of religion that was so characteristic of the conflict of the last several centuries in Eastern Europe.
In Eastern Europe?
Well, Eastern Europe, Europe in general. What was it? The 100 Years' War was primarily Catholics versus Protestant.
Yeah. The 100 Years' War? No, the 30 Years' War. The 100 Years' War was pre-Protestant. Yeah, I'm not. I do think when he talks about, I mean, apart from this, maybe I haven't come to that bit where he talks specifically about Catholicism, but my sense of it is that when he talks about the church and the bishop, I think it's quite vague. I don't think he's really thinking of a denomination. It's
just an offhand remark. He doesn't go, in detail on it. But I just after the conversation saw that, and it stuck in my head that he's singled out the Catholics.
Yeah, he's probably thinking of the past, like the deep past. Because again, Catholicism was on the edges of the mainstream in America at this time.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so on the bishop, any points that anyone wants to raise on the bishop? We spoke about him last week to an extent, but this is where you see his depersoning, and as Quackhouse said, he sympathizes with the proletariat and wants to help them, and this is what they use as justification for putting him in an asylum, which is a narrative that I've heard a few times, that people would just, lock people up and throw away the key if they wanted to get rid of them. I don't know how true it is historically, but it is something that comes up as to why, why the institutions were, so awful back in the day.
Yeah,
I mean, look at One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. That sort of mentality towards mental health institutions seems quite pervasive.
And yet I think like that movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and the book were used to to close the institutions, and then they had problems, but that's led to, in large part, to the homeless problem of today.
Yeah, well, this is the problem. Where do they go? They don't just disappear.
Yeah.
If you're going to shut down these facilities, they have people in them.
Severe problem like schizophrenia and bipolar in some cases. Like, these are real problems. They're not created by psychiatrists or whatever, right? So there are a lot of abuses in psychiatry, but these are real people with real severe problems. But yeah, there were abuses as well. But it doesn't justify shutting down all the institutions. It just justifies reforming them.
And then we go into what the bishop actually does around the town and for whom he does it. And we see basically that he's enabling people who are not dealing with the changes in their lives. He's helping people to get by rather than get ahead.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and that's character. That is put very succinctly when Ernest says, as what a negative society we're in. That formerly a man that gave away all of his wealth would have been considered, a saint, and now someone that gives away all their wealth is considered a madman. Well, no. If you're giving away all of your wealth, then you've just capped. You've cut yourself off at the kneecaps. You can't get ahead, and you've given it to people without actually helping them. You just chuck some money their way,
Yeah.
And once it's gone, what happens next? You know, it's the old give a man a fish or teach him to fish.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean,
Actually beneficial.
you can spend all your money on fish and still starve at the end of it.
Some people will just go to Vegas for a weekend with your money, and then you know.
But if there's a surplus of fish, according to London, then they need to purchase it because of figures. When we get, I mean, we covered that in the last episode, but again, just some of those models for economics that, particularly around this time, are just so insane to me.
Well, and with this little old lady is a perfect example of that. Here we have a 64-year-old woman who's a seamstress by trade, living on her own in a 10 by 12 room in a rear tenement. Where's her family? Where's her friends? Where's anyone who's willing to take her in?
Well, her
She's
husband
clearly-
and daughter died in the machine in the factory. But
Okay.
yeah, where's everyone else?
Yeah, where is anyone who's willing to take in this woman who's clearly willing to work hard, and why is she not trying to find some place where she could work with other people rather than trying to be a single lonely atomized individual getting by doing the same things that she's been doing for half a century now?
Yeah, and even that, her boss seems to be extremely forgiving. He's allowing her to work from home. I mean, you know, he pays her less, but she's not as fast, so he's giving her a reduced salary to work from home, to carry on working because she can't work in the factory anymore. It's not the demonization that I think Jack London thinks it is.
So he wheels on these characters every so often that are meant to sort of demonstrate something. What is this little old lady meant to teach us, since it's very didactic?
And actually, it in some ways relates to what I was saying last time about the bishop, in that it's sort of reminiscent of a Dante's Inferno journey through hell. You know, that's the way that Ernest is kind of phrasing it and how he sees it. But
so what London's trying to bring up in this is that this is the natural, inevitable human consequence of the economic system under which all these people live, that it must chew up and spit out people like this little old lady, that after presumably 50 years of work for the company, she gets tossed on her ear and is forced to make ends meet by working longer for less, which, as Albion pointed out, is a very generous and magnanimous gesture on behalf of her boss. And this is, I'm guessing, so we had the gentleman in the beginning of the book who lost his arm to the machine, and now she's lost her wife and husband to the machine. And this is what London is saying is the inevitable consequence of everyone who manages to survive, that you're going to work for your entire life serving the man, as it were, and have absolutely nothing with which to subsist at the end of your years, which is just flat out untrue. Further, it doesn't say anything about her saving anything. So I'm presuming she had at least at some point in time, she was making a decent amount of money. She was 64 years old, and apparently she's been a very good seamstress her entire life. 64 years in the past, being a seamstress was actually a quite good job. So what did she do with the surpluses she was making in her youth?
I mean, implying that there was no excess to save.
Yeah, I think that's the implication. That she's being given the bare bones to survive her entire life, and it's just a system of exploitation. I mean, that's obviously what he's going for.
Yeah, but that was clearly not the economic case for the 50 years previous. The late 1800s, seamstresses made very good money. prior to the Industrial Revolution, because it was skilled work.
So it's all about time preference. This whole book is about time preference. So instead of that what's it called? Everhard is grabbing his shit together and trying to start a company and build something. He just basically goes like, no, I'm not gonna wait. I'm just want to have stuff which is right there. I'm just gonna take it by hook or crook. And so yeah, it's just being really, really averse to investing in the future. And Seamstress is the same. So jealous people.
Yeah, I think the next thing that we go on to, this is what I was talking about. Christ told the rich young man to sell all he had. The bishop obeyed Christ's injunction and got locked up in a madhouse. This is what I was referencing when I was talking about the comparison. I think the next thing that we probably have something to talk about is the international, the general strike. So the international socialists are able to stop a world war by going for a picnic. Interesting idea. It didn't really seem to happen. Has there ever been evidence of international, coordination of the proletariat in this manner? Would you count Black Lives Matter as that movement? I mean, obviously it's not ground up, but is that the closest we have?
Does Antifa have picnics? Because I'd like to see that.
There has been some international cooperation amongst various socialist groups, but that's usually been in countries that are countries basically in name only.
I mean, a lot of the problem seems to be various groups of sort of different flavors of socialists fighting each other, aren't they? I mean, rather than doing anything else.
Right, but
mid-century Germans, it was just one flavor of socialism fighting another flavor of socialism until one of them won.
Right.
Should we read a section?
Yeah, I'm just looking at what we can read.
Oh, here's Hearst.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, let's cover from here, I think.
Plutocracy.
Yeah, it's got a couple of interesting points on here.
Okay, shall I read for a bit?
Yep.
Okay, plutocracy, to carry the sentence out, and with Hearst crashed also to destruction the Democratic Party that he had so recently captured. With the destruction of Hearst and the Democratic Party, there were only two paths for his following to take. One was into the Socialist Party, the other was into the Republican Party. Then it was that we socialists reaped the fruit of Hearst's pseudo-socialistic preaching. The great majority of his followers came over to us. The expropriation of the farmers that took place at this time would also have swelled our vote had it not been for the brief and futile rise of the Grange Party. Ernest and the socialist leaders fought fiercely to capture the farmers, but the destruction of the socialist press and publishing houses constituted too great a handicap, while the mouth-to-mouth propaganda had not yet been perfected. So it was that politicians like Mr. Calvin, who were themselves farmers long since expropriated, captured the farmers and threw their political strength away in a vain campaign. Poor farmers, Ernest once laughed savagely. It was bitterly on the previous page. The trusts have them both coming and going.
And this is a classic Marxian example of people voting against their class consciousness.
Also notes Mr. Calvin.
Against against their interest.
Yeah. Well, against the false class consciousness, I think is Marx's phrase. A false consciousness.
I think that comes later with the
False
the
consciousness.
Frankfurt School trying to justify why the revolution hadn't already taken place.
False consciousness is any reactionary ideas in the working class that the Marxists don't like.
Of course.
It's good to have a catch-all term for it. Makes it easier to pigeonhole. So yes, we see going on from that. Trying to pick out some good parts to read.
The next
This
section
was-
that's interesting is nevertheless the socialist landslide, which is a couple pages later. Next page, I think.
Yes, yes. So this is where we really start going down a rabbit hole of pseudo history. Does someone want to read this section?
Someone else? Frank?
Bishop, why don't you read?
I can't read. I can't read aloud. Sorry.
Makes it difficult to be in part of a book group.
I'm very good at faking stuff, though.
Nevertheless, the socialist landslide occurred, but instead of a sweeping victory with chief executive officers and majorities in all legislative bodies, we found ourselves in the minority. It is true we elected 50 congressmen, but when they took their seats in the spring of 1913, they found themselves without power of any sort. Yet, and let's again look to Trump for that. We may have taken some seats, but what actual power did you have to yield? Yet, they were more fortunate than the Grangers, who captured a dozen state governments and who, in the spring, were not permitted to take possession of the captured offices. The incumbents refused to retire, and the courts were in the hands of the oligarchy. But this is too far in advance of events. I've yet to tell you of the stirring times of the winter of 1912. So, again, referencing when I was speaking before about the oligarchy of not ceding power, even though they were defeated through the ballot. This is what I meant about the votes being falsified. So yes, now we move on to the general strike of 1912. So the hard times at home had caused an immense decrease in consumption. Labour, out of work, had no wages with which to buy. The result was that the plutocracy found a greater surplus than it ever had on its hands. This surplus it was compelled to dispose of abroad, and what of its colossal plans, it needed money. Because of its strenuous efforts to dispose of the surplus in the world market, the plutocracy clashed with Germany. Which, again, it's strange that he's making a differentiation of the plutocracy and the Germans, because in some sections he's describing it as essentially a world system, because later on we see movements happening in every country across the globe, really, to overthrow and install this socialist regime. Whereas now he's saying that the plutocracy is clashing with another country. So he's making a differentiation there.
Oddly, what he accuses industrialists of doing is actually what governments do. So what the European Union does is that they buy the surplus production of milk and other agricultural products.
Mm-hmm.
So they're subsidizing the farmers in some way. So while the natural reaction to the market would be that they would go out of business or that they would have to restructure. So.
Mm-hmm.
So this it's a Keynesian way of looking at the economics, right?
No, very.
Yeah.
I mean,
when was Keynes writing? Sorry to interrupt.
Mid-century, 20th century.
I think it's a little bit too early for Keynes, but yeah, I think.
Well, it's the idea of that economics is can be studied on a macro level. Because that's what he describes, right? He's talking about the surplus, not about, there's this one factory and it produces too much and they're stuck with this warehouses full of supply and they hatch this plan to sell it. They say, well, everybody's doing this, which would naturally lead to a large supply.
Well, I think it's viewing models as being reality, not a reflection of reality that can change the model then needs updating the minute that reality changes.
Models reflecting. Nah, people won't do that, right? Base policy on some model, and then when it goes wrong, you shift the goalposts. Nah, I mean we move beyond that. I mean we're moving towards the brotherhood of man, so we should have shed something like that immediately. I mean, there's even a scientific way of describing this, so you can see the error and like. No, I think he's underestimating human capacity in this paragraph. Wait, I'll stop being sarcastic for a moment.
Don't.
No, it's like, where's the surplus? How is this produced? How does a factory remain solvent while not selling stuff and still producing something?
I'm just wondering how you buy a surplus of milk. I mean, like it's hard, it goes off quite quickly, right?
Yeah, perishable goods are kind of also throw a wrench in the works, but let's ignore that.
I mean, with regards to milk, I mean, you would shift the milk to be used in other ways, you know.
Mm-hmm.
If you were intelligent, if you're
Yeah.
the government, you just buy the milk and store it in a factory, and then when it goes bad, you just pour it down the drain.
Or you turn it into milk powder and you send it to the third world, which is what they're also doing.
Yeah, well, I was watching a video.
Oh, wait a
on
minute!
the-
Getting rid of the surplus production by sending it abroad.
Well, you just
He's
need to
onto
increase.
something.
You need to increase its value. Like I was watching a video on the economics of New Zealand, and apparently one of the things that the New Zealand government did was just get rid of all the subsidies to the farmers, which just essentially forced them into being more efficient. Which is which is what the British government and the American government, and presumably other European governments, just don't do. They just subsidise the farmers to.
There's one
high
country
heaven.
that doesn't need subsidies for farmers. It's New Zealand. That is one giant farm.
Listen, farming kiwis is not easy. They keep running away. Those fruits.
You know, it forced them to divert, you know, to give added value to the milk, you know, by making it into baby formula and, you know, fancy cheeses and stuff like that. You know?
Or just not producing as much if you don't need it.
The thing is, if you take it off the market and send it abroad as a government, then it actually doesn't enter the market, so it doesn't influence the price. So basically, you're constantly buying for a certain price. And that means that, there's no incentive for the farmers to become more efficient or incentive to go bankrupt in case that they're producing too much. And
but if you can turn your milk into something of a higher value, like cheese or baby formula, then, you know.
It does make sense. Just picturing warehouses full of spoiled milk.
A lot of bacterial cultures going on here. No, but it is also with other products. So we've become there is a certain efficiency, of course, for farmers to produce because they still make more money when they produce more. But there's just some overproduction, which would mean that there would be competition on the market, and it doesn't happen. And at the same time, because of the price control, farmers are still going out of business because now they're dependent on these subsidies.
But if you're, you know, if you've got if you're over producing one thing, you just switch to producing a different thing, I guess, if you were smart, you know.
Yeah.
Well, the challenge specifically with farming in that regard is the growth cycle and the length of time that you have between when you initially lay down your production and when you harvest.
Yeah, I mean, what's that term? What's that term where farmers basically sell the people who buy the produce?
Futures market.
Yeah, so they buy in advance, so you know the farmer knows exactly how much he's going to sell because he's already sold it.
Yeah, options and futures.
Yeah,
and that it's not even just the single crop that you put in that year. You have to factor in crop rotation to make sure that the land is actually capable of sustainable production. So this year it's barley, next year it's wheat, and the year after that it's oats, and the year after that it's sorghum. And I'm not a farmer, so these are just obviously examples. But if you're at the wheat section and you've been planning this for 4 years, and the previous 3 years the wheat price has been cut in half every year, you're screwed.
So this bottom paragraph, I do quite like. It feels like it could be in a Adam Curtis film. The war cloud hovered dark and ominous. The stage was set for a world catastrophe. For in all the world were hard times, labor troubles, perishing middle classes, armies of unemployed, clashes of economic interests in the world market, and mutterings and rumblings of the socialist revolution.
Well, at least they get strong men.
It's just
With
one of the few
with Tic Tacs.
Yeah, you beat me to it.
one of the few little sections I think is actually quite poetically written.
Mm-hmm. I saw Adam Curtis interviewed the other day, and I thought it was Morrissey.
It was more what, sorry?
I'm the only one. He looked like Morrissey. He looked just like, the
Like
singer
Morrissey?
Yeah.
Does
I
he?
thought so. Yes, weirdly.
God, Morrissey's obviously. Oh, do you know? Actually, I can see that. I can see that.
What do you mean, Neil Morrissey?
No, Morrissey, the singer of the Smiths.
I'm not sure.
The
Oh,
charming
like that
man.
Morrissey.
And truly the war would have done all these things had it not been for the socialists. A secret meeting of the Western leaders was held in 4 tiny rooms in Pell Street. Here was the first considered the stand of the socialists were to take. It was not the first time we had put our foot down upon war, but it was the first time we had done so in the United States. After our secret meeting, we got in touch with the national organization, and soon our code cables were passing back and forth across the Atlantic between us and the International Bureau. The German socialists were ready to act with us. There were over 5 million of them, many of them in the standing army, and, in addition, they were on friendly terms with their labor unions. In both countries, the socialists came out in bold declaration against the war and threatened the general strike. And in the meantime, they made preparation for the general strike. Furthermore, the revolutionary parties in all countries gave public utterance to the socialist principle of international peace that must be preserved at all hazards, even to the extent of revolt and revolution at home. And then the notation. It was at the very beginning of the 20th century AD that the International Organization of the Socialists finally formulated their long maturing policy on war. Epitomized their doctrine was, why should the working man of one country fight with the working man of another country for the benefit of their capitalist masters? Pure fancy.
Has it ever happened?
Yeah, well, this sort of class consciousness is I've never seen it actually come to fruition in reality.
Yeah.
It's usually the upper class that is quite international and cosmopolitan, and they all speak. They speak this, for example, back in the 19th century, they would all speak French or some language. They would understand each other, and then you would see this international bond. But to project this onto the working class, who basically already has no bond with somebody next town over. I know that there are huge feuds between towns next to each other, which are expressed in soccer games and other things. Why would they feel
families?
Yeah, why would they feel? You might feel solidarity for somebody who works at the same factory, but if somebody works for a competitor, you wouldn't even feel much solidarity.
I mean, you only have to see people arguing about whether they prefer Mac OS to Windows.
Yeah, those Mac OS idiots.
To know that people argue about completely anything. I've never seen so much venom.
A miscalculation on their part to think that they could stir people up and, in that way. Like, think of the people in.
I mean, Windows is obviously the best version of Linux.
But like, was it? Well, there's certain anti-war people or whatever you want to. They always hark back to the First World War when they had a break to they had a break to play football, didn't they? And then they went back to killing each other. And they're like, oh well, if only they could have just, I don't know. It's like at that point they could have just said, right, then we're not going to go back and fight, but they obviously did.
They weren't at home and they weren't with their family. Everybody was in the same shit and nobody wanted to be there, and that was the unifying thing. But it's not happens when you're in your day-to-day business and you're trying to raise a family and you have kids and you have your friends around you. Then you don't
also the First World War is an exceptional case. I don't think you would have seen much football going on during the Napoleonic War, as an example.
Was it invented already?
Well, Can you
The
picture
first-
at Battle of Agincourt them just playing a game of football? I don't really see that happening.
You
Well,
were
the
never
thing is-
Solidarity.
The First
They-
World War marked a massive change in warfighting technology that had previously been inconceivable. So
Mhm.
no one knew how to fight a war to actually win in World War One. They knew how not to fight a war because that would involve getting thousands of their men shot crossing no man's land. But they had no idea how to actually fix that as a problem. So while the big brains were trying to come up with a way out of this solution, everything was put on pause. And if anyone's ever been in the military, you know that the one of the worst things to do is to tell an infantryman to just sit there and hold his position for days that become weeks, that become months. And at that point, everyone is looking for anything that can change the status quo. So if your worst enemy is willing to play football with you, sure, why not? It's something better than sitting here in the mud up to my knees, freezing my balls off.
Yeah, and I suppose the
That
only
was
other
only
time they would have the only other time they would have seen each other face to face would have been just before one of them got killed. Whereas in previous wars, you would have seen the guy across the field and had to
Also,
walk
it
up
was
to
it was Christmas Day as well, wasn't it?
Mhm.
But other wars are relatively brief. So these guys are here for months and months. There's this other story about on the Eastern Front where you had this Russian soldier who could sing really, really well, and people are enjoying that. And at one point it stopped. So the Germans were starting to throw notes over the trenches to ask, is he doing okay, and start throwing bottles of medicine to make sure that he got well, because they enjoyed his singing so much. But if you're stuck somewhere for a long time in a miserable position, anything that's enjoyable is like something to be cherished, and that's what you saw. So even if he was part of the enemy, his voice was so beautiful that they basically said, well, yeah, we want him to be well. And yeah, I can imagine that but you also see after the war that two enemy combatants meet, just soldiers, and they have this brotherly thing going on because they've been through the same hell, just from the different sides.
Well, something like that happened in the early days of the Italian COVID lockdown. There was some guy on a balcony singing. Everybody seemed to like everybody liked that for a little bit, didn't they?
Yeah.
Let's not forget as well, it's meant to be an international movement, and we're just talking about Europe at the moment. What the hell is some Chinese person making Nike shoes got in common with a bloke that works in I don't know, in Tesco?
He's making his that's what they've got in common. They got the shoes in common.
Yeah, one of them's wearing the shoes and one of them's making them. That's about the only commonality that they've got.
Yeah.
This class consciousness is just non-existent, and it's funny because there's there's multiple sections. Sorry, I just want to make this, but there's multiple sections where people say, well, I was just in the world of theory, but you've introduced me to reality. And I just think, what reality are you living in where there's this class consciousness? I've never come across it.
Also, if you remember the Occupy Wall Street with the 1%, right? So that 99% that was there at Wall Street is basically the 1% of the world. So it's like if you're from anywhere else than New York, and you look at those people with their lattes and their designer shoes complaining about the fact that they're poor, you go like, you're such pulp. You're like the 16-year-old who's crying because she got a BMW, but it's the wrong color. It's like, just go away, please.
What is it? If you're earning 30 grand in America, you're in the top 1% of the world, something like that.
Easily.
Yeah. Well, gentlemen, on that note, I actually have to cut out a little early today. And apologies to all of you. Justine, I'm sorry to have excluded you from the appellation up there. But
yeah, well, I'm an honorary gentleman, I suppose.
Yes, it's a gentleman and gentlewoman. So
I'm so triggered right now.
I trust you. I trust you will give the rest of the book the thorough thrashing it deserves, especially its ending.
Yeah, well, yes. Right. Thank you for
Thanks,
being with us.
Bye.
Talk to you soon.
See you later.
Okay, so let's skip on to the beginning of the end. Yeah, so there's still a belief that after this act of international solidarity, that they can have a peaceful resolution to the problems that's happening in America. If I remember correctly, it's here that we see a reference to America being one of the only countries that doesn't fall pretty much instantly. There's one section where we see someone say, "Oh, what are you doing? Why aren't you advancing the cause?" I think it's somewhere around here. Let me just try and find it one moment.
It's kind of the case throughout history that the only kind of group, demographic group that have kind of protested or, had got together and got something done is kind of like middle-ish class, upper working class women, essentially.
Well, that's certainly the middle class, and then yes,
but women specifically, like the only group that has been able to, historically has got together and protested the government to do something. That they're the only ones that ever get their own way.
Oh yeah, that's true. What with between the prohibition and the vote for women and this kind of thing.
Yeah, I think was it something that I can't remember exactly what it was. The government was doing in India. There was a big protest at the time, and the government actually backed down on it. And I can't remember exactly what it was now, but yeah, and there was probably a couple of other occasions as well, which I'm forgetting. But yeah, that's kind of one that stuck in my head.
Yeah, prohibition is used as the example case. But it wasn't just the introduction of prohibition where it was very much female-led. From memory, there was a massive female movement to then get rid of prohibition. Almost
same women,
yeah. Or in some cases, yes, but almost immediately as soon as it came in, because I don't know, maybe they realized that.
Maybe it backfired.
They had to put up with their husbands.
Wasn't it that it was done to call the violence of Irish men back then?
It was one of the claims of it.
Yeah, and the result was that the Irish started making gangs to start producing alcohol and became extremely violent. So basically backfired immediately, and it led to the rise of organized crime.
Yes, without prohibition, the mob would have been nowhere near as large as they were. That's in Chicago and New York. But obviously, what's often left out is not just the Italian mob, but the Jewish mob as well. And the Irish were. It was I believe the first time that the Irish actually started to properly coordinate. But they were never particularly big. But Irish gangs actually started to unify to work in prohibition.
Wasn't Joseph Kennedy one of those people?
Yes, he was. That's a whole rabbit hole that we could go down. But I would happily cover that topic. I find it fascinating. I've always had an interest in organized crime. I don't know what it is. Just, I suppose, gangster flicks appeal to me.
A suitable book to read. You could read The Godfather. Or something.
We could read The Godfather, yeah, or The Sicilian, which I think is meant to be even better than The Godfather by Puzo.
Did they make a film of that one as well?
They did. Nowhere near as popular. And I think it had massive production issues. Let me just bring it up one moment. This is we're going so off topic. Let me not bring it up actually, because then I'm just going to go on a tangent. So let's carry on instead. So we see unionization. Sorry, we didn't get to the part I was talking about earlier. What we see at the moment is that Ernest is being pessimistic. He believes that the Iron Heel is still going to fight back by appeasing interest groups within the proletariat. So in this case, certain unions, certain skilled union labor. They're going to appease them and stop them from striking so that they don't have to worry about any other group striking because they can just destroy the unions. Which again, if there's this international proletariat feeling and class consciousness, unions would just be a byproduct of that, not the cause of it. So you wouldn't need the unions in place. You'd still be able to process just as well if it was an actual consciousness of the class.
Yeah, I think it's the same reason why it's sometimes hard to feel like if you hear that there's a disaster halfway across the world, unless you're kind of close to those people in some way, you kind of, it's hard to feel it as deeply as you would if the disaster happened in your country or just across the channel or something like that. I think it's natural. I don't think it's just you feel more concerned to members of your family and your extended family. It's not.
Yeah, it's in group preference.
Yeah.
And it appears that white people are the only people that have to justify that.
Yeah. If we're having that beat out of us, or it's been beat out of us.
Okay. Carry on. Again, just throwing models here, there, and everywhere. So we can skip past this, I think. Yeah, so this is where we see, as I said, the placating to certain unions.
There's a kind of millennial vibe going on and sort of apocalyptic vibe, like in the passage that you quoted in Here's Last Days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, kind of a Y2K feeling to it.
Yeah.
Or the end of the Mayan calendar sort of vibes. I really can't find the quote that I was talking about earlier. And I wanted to get to it because I find it just entertaining that we've had all of this rhetoric coming out of the book. And then he sort of addresses worldwide revolution with one line. And we don't get any development on that. It's just, we've all managed to topple the government and install the socialist paradise. Why haven't you, America? I mean, that's essentially the most explanation we get. It's going to be somewhere along here. Yeah, actually, there is also an interesting reference to some understanding of what happens during these revolutions and how they can get subverted. Because he makes reference to Japan supporting proletarian revolutions in neighboring nations.
Which they never
to then establish an empire by coming in when the revolution has just taken place and then colonizing. So there's at least a certain understanding of realpolitik here, I suppose.
I was trying to explain to a Japanese client about how the European Union works and the sort of the idea of having a common market, but also like no borders and people being able to come and go from other countries as they please. And I said, like if you had that with China and Korea, let's say, and they were just like horrified.
Yeah, I remember there being an alternative history video game. I think it was it was some crappy military shooter thing, and the premise was that there was essentially a Pan-Asian empire formed by the unification of Korea, and then the joining of Korea, Japan, and China to make this Asian imperial force. And I was just like, of everything, I believe sci-fi more than I believe this, because that's never going to happen.
Never.
I mean, the unification of Korea alone is never going to happen, and then you throw on top of that Japan and China resolving their differences.
Yeah, and just letting each other wander back and forth.
I suppose it goes against their grain to, attribute being not very nice to other countries that are our own.
You mean? Could you expand on that?
Well, the left in Britain and America, particularly, they'll attribute anything bad they can possibly think of to Britain, America in that case, while attributing everything positive and good to every other country, if they possibly can. So saying that other countries would quite happily band together and be happy and and all nice to each other, if only we were to keep out of the way and stop meddling.
Right.
That's kind of.
It's xenophilia, as I like to.
Well, it's kind of like reverse. It's nationalism, isn't it? In the sense, that nationalism towards an idea, or it's like reverse nationalism. It's like everything but this instead of everything include.
Yes, yeah. Just reminds me of Notes on Nationalism.
Well, that's what I was referring to. Like, the way he describes it, it's like you can be a nationalist for socialism, for instance, or you can be a British nationalist for Russia, the USSR. I've known people like that.
Yeah, I'm still not convinced that the phrasing of that is right, but I think that ideology is probably a more accurate term that we'd use now as opposed to nationalism.
An ideologue.
Yeah, I think so.
But if
I think
the
it covers
idea
more
is,
bases.
If the idea is, I suppose the idea is, I suppose it is idealism. Yeah, if the idea is communism, or if the idea is Britain is crap and everywhere else is better.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'd say more of that exists than the reverse.
Mm-hmm. So we then see her father turn into Mr. Ben, because he just every day he seems to walk out and take on a new job, which again, when the labor market is apparently so difficult to get into and so crushing, he seems to just every day. There's a Marxist line about this, which I can't remember verbatim, where he talks about people should have the opportunity to one day wake up and be a poet, and the next day, be a carpenter, and the next a milkman or whatever. And so he basically embodies that.
Just download the skills from the Matrix, and
exactly.
You have to take into account that things like day jobs exist. So if you have really low skilled labor, you hire somebody for a day to do a job, and the next day in the morning you just pick out several people to do that job. That's something you also saw in the series Babylon Berlin, where there were just a bunch of girls standing at the office, and when they needed a secretary, say for a day, you're going to be my secretary for the day. So that would explain why he was moving from job to job, because if somebody's really good, you might hire him, but if the economy was bad, then you wouldn't do that.
Yes, but I think it's being said that he intentionally jumps from job to job because he just wants to feel like he's kind of LARPing in every job role he can think of to feel like he's part of the proletariat.
Yeah.
That's the impression I get. It's like
he's acting like common people.
Yeah. He's trying to blend in and be like, "Oh, hello, fellow proletariat."
Doing everything common people do.
Yes, well, he tries to live like common people.
Yeah,
he just wants to be like common people.
Yeah,
like you. Let's carry on. This stream is a tangent stream embodied. Right. Let's move on.
Jarvis Cocker's not the way.
Not as bad as Ernest, but yes.
He's common.
I think Jarvis Cocker would have loved Ernest.
Mm-hmm.
I think that Jarvis Cocker's neck is really thin.
It is.
like a chicken neck. He's a bit like if he was fat, then he would look like a turkey.
He's very long, isn't he? He's a long, thin
I don't
man.
know. I can't see. He harassed Michael Jackson once,
He did.
Michael Jackson was doing his Earth song on stage in some kind of, these award shows we used to have and people used to watch. And
lots of children dancing. I remember that.
Yeah,
was the
and,
key. That was
Yeah, and he jumped up. But actually, Michael Jackson has been vindicated, so he's been acquitted from child molesting. So
was it?
yeah, so finally,
Oh.
after all these years, it's still going on, despite the fact that he might be dead. So,
But by whom? Who
Hang on,
acquitted him?
I don't
This
know
is
who
a
murdered
good
him.
tangent.
They say that his
What?
doctor murdered him. I don't know who deaded him.
I mean, that documentary is crap.
Which one?
Is it something Neverland, Return to
Yeah.
Neverland, Escape to
Yeah.
Neverland? That
Yeah.
guy, that he is just an attention seeker that wanted money because he had debts to pay, and he made the documentary. He admitted that all of the accusations he was putting forwards were false, and then there was like a court order where he couldn't make allegations for a certain period of time, and then he made the documentary like a week after that time period elapsed, something like that, so that he could just cash in.
Yeah.
So I
Sounds
mean,
about
I
right.
don't know. Michael Jackson was a very strange man, so I'm not going to defend him because I don't know, but I will say that documentary is just a cash grab, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I don't trust most documentaries, to be fair, unless they're, no. Depends what trying to. It depends if they're trying to make a point. I guess.
Depends on if I agree with them.
The last good documentary I watched was Wild Wild Country.
Well,
Yes, I've
really-
heard good things about that.
Yeah, that gave me flashbacks though to my childhood.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Well, the part about bringing all the homeless people in to increase your vote share, and then it going horribly wrong because they're all mentally ill and won't do what they're told.
Who'd have thought? Right.
And it also kind of knocks on the head the idea that if you just let women be in charge, everything would be great.
Everything would be great. Yeah.
Let's try and pull back to this. We're almost there.
Try.
Um,
You found a passage? No?
That's what
let's
she said.
let's go on to something that should be pointed out as well is that there's many editions of the Iron Heel. It feels like he just rewrote it every time a new circulation was being published. So this is why occasionally it has been a little bit difficult to find paragraphs in their place, because my edition is not this. And I feel like mine was considerably longer. I feel like we're almost at the end now. Thank God.
It was a long train journey. I remember that.
Violence is breaking out here in the middle.
Yes, let's go for some
Bloodbaths.
violence.
As with California, so elsewhere, every Granger state was ravaged with violence and washed in blood. First, disorder was precipitated by the secret agents and the Black Hundreds. Then the troops were called out. Rioting and mob rule reigned through the streets of the Royal District. Day and night, smoke of burning farms, warehouses, villages, and cities filled the sky.
Are you quoting from the book there? Oh,
Yeah.
Is that a news
No,
report?
I'm just looking out the window.
Sorry, carry on.
Right.
Sorry.
Railroad bridges and tunnels were blown up and trains were wrecked. The poor farmers were shot and hanged in great numbers. Reprisals were bitter, and many plutocrats and army officers were murdered. Blood and vengeance were in men's hearts. The regular troops fought the farmers as savagely as they had been Indians. And the regular troops had cause. 2,800 of them had been annihilated in a tremendous series of dynamite explosions in Oregon, and in a similar manner in Oregon. Sorry, keep thinking of Portland every night.
Yeah, we bounced. I mean, they're from Berkeley, and we're talking about Oregon. I mean, these places have been lost for at least 100 years.
Again, if you ever watch that Wild Wild Country documentary, it's next to Portland, and one of the places that they're trying to capture. One of the places that they're trying to kind of influence the voting is Portland, and the Portland people are against these hippie, socialist, commune, degenerates. And it just makes you think what happened in the last, since the end of the 70s.
People used to be more based and they resist these people, but
the very fast decline. This is the extreme.
the whole West Coast used to be littered with Rajneesh people. You could see they always wore some shade of red, so like orange, pink, purple, bright red. And you'd see them parading through the streets.
Yeah.
But not only that, but I've seen a few communes like that up close and personal. Scary.
So just on this section, so what we're seeing is the Iron Heel clashing with the proletariat, and kind of beyond, from this onwards is just a series of conflicts that he writes about between the oligarchs and the proles. There's not, from this point on, we will carry on, but I feel like we kind of run out of steam on talking points from this point onwards. But
actually, what he's just describing, because we're heading towards the Chicago Commune, right? So basically, everything's going to shit. Kids are throwing their toys out of the pram, and basically it turns into like, what is it, 5 days in Fallujah. So basically, just a war zone. Just take any movie. That kind of description.
But are we kind of
Saving Private Ryan, landing on the beaches, sort of chaos.
And of course it's all justified.
Yes.
And
we definitely gave them all a trial. We didn't just execute people for no reason.
No.
And there's hints of Yossarian walking through Italy as well.
Yeah. I wonder if Heller read Jack London. I wouldn't be surprised.
But did you go through the bit with the commune or the farm or whatever you want to call it that they stayed in?
You mean the farm? They made a circle. They made a circle of earth on cardboard and they tried to grow tomatoes there or something, or
yeah, something like that. Where they kind of inculcated the guy, the son of one of the the nasty people.
Yeah, that actually to me is is quite disturbing. It has moments of Clockwork Orange. We're going to kidnap the child of the oligarchy, and
I'm just saying Patty Hearst.
Yeah.
Yes, we're going to play Beethoven's Fifth at him until he agrees to worship the proletariat.
Albion, do you know who Patty Hearst is?
The name rings a bell, but I'm off the top of my head.
Okay, so she the name Hearst, that's a rich family, right?
Yeah.
So they kidnapped her, and then at some point she joined her kidnappers, suffering from the Stockholm syndrome, so basically that describes exactly what happens is exactly what's described in this book. She was brainwashed into their cult or into their group.
Into what group? Sorry.
She was assaulted. Eventually, she joined their group. Then she changed her name to Tanya, picked up a gun, and started doing bank robberies and things with them.
Oh, right.
She was the granddaughter of William Randolph Hearst.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I knew where the term came from, but I didn't realize that was her name. I thought it ended with her. I didn't realize that she went on to join the group to quite that extent.
They call her a Maoist group.
What do you think? Do you think it is the Stockholm syndrome, or do you think it's kind of more of a Dances with Wolves kind of syndrome?
It's really hard to call that one. I mean, I feel sorry for her because I know she was tortured, like she was kept in a closet, she was raped, but
oh yeah, that. But, no, I mean, in the case of the Iron Heel.
To be honest, I haven't read the part where there's a parallel situation. What happens is Avis get kidnapped by the Symbionese army?
No, they kind of run off to hide, and they've got like it's just somewhere she used to frequent when she was growing up, wasn't it? Like she had like almost like a little den commune type.
Yeah, and
thing.
it's next to the land of one of the oligarchs that she wants to, stiff essentially. So it's kind of point and laugh at the fact that they're so close to them.
But they go and live there for quite a long time, don't they? And they're kind of hidden.
Yeah, we'll see if that's actually in this one because, like I say, we've only got 35 pages left, I think, and I feel like they've probably omitted that in this.
There was kind of that section, and then there's the kind of the whole bit of going
Chicago
to the
commune.
where there's something afoot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as I say, it is just an escalation of violence. Good lord, look at that. There's just an escalation of violence through this, and it does go more onto a narrative, so we don't need to address it directly.
Yeah, well, is that the part where they go on the long train journey?
Mm-hmm.
And it seems that seems to go on forever. That train journey. Whether I'm misremembering it.
This is a good page to finish on, just for this end of the chapter. Look, the revolution took on largely the character of religion. We worshipped at the shrine of the revolution, which was the shrine of liberty. It was the divine flashing through us. Men and women devoted their lives to the cause, and newborn babes were sealed to it. As of old, as of old, they had been sealed to the service of God. We were lovers of humanity. And anyone that thinks that is an acceptable paragraph to write, you've got to seriously question.
Capital H, humanity.
Yes, very interesting use of capitalization there, and obviously capitalization of revolution. Because obviously, once you make a cult to a revolution, you can't just stop. You can't end a revolution when that is your religion. So, goodbye, Robespierre. And, get sharpening those guillotines.
Well, the left always end up. It's always a religion without redemption, without forgiveness.
Yes. So we're coming up to the house. So this is when they're trying to frame Ernest for trying to commit a terrorist attack, essentially.
Yeah, I suppose because previous to that, he was just kind of like what's the word for it? He was like a curiosity almost, wasn't he? Being invited to all these places to speak.
Well, you would think that they would have done this tactic a long time prior to this, because we've already had a lot of armed conflict happening, and they're still allowed to be in politics. I don't think that would happen.
Well, do you think it's the case of like because he's quite extreme, isn't he? He's an extreme person. So like you keep the extreme people visible, and you give them a bit of a platform. Whereas the moderates below him, but they're the ones that you ban. So your bishop who's saying things and doing good things, you kind of push him away. Well, the ones who are more extreme, you give them the platform.
Not if they're an effective populist, though, because he's gaining momentum through his speeches. Whereas if you had someone that had the same thoughts, but was poor spoken, then I understand what you mean. So yes, they frame him for trying to blow up a gathering. Skip on. Again, this does just kind of go to a narrative. There's not anything really deeper to look into. a page of footnotes.
He definitely picks up pace towards the end, with the wall, the what goes on in the city.
Mhm.
They're going to blow it up. And I was also quite amused by, because obviously the time it's written, it was like pre-aeroplane, and they're dropping bombs on people with hot air balloons, and fighting with that, that kind of technology. It's quite amusing.
It's almost like a film script in that kind of escalation quality that it has. But
you can just imagine it though, can't you? With the bit with they're on the train and the kind of build up. It's actually that bit's quite cinematic, I guess.
Do they have zeppelins, or are zeppelins aren't they kind of hot air balloons? And effectively,
yeah. I mean, it doesn't call them zeppelins; it does call them hot air balloons. So it calls them balloons.
Zeppelins are not hot air balloons. They use lighter than air gas, like hydrogen or helium.
Yeah, in this particular story, though, it calls them just balloons, doesn't it? Or is it?
They say balloons. We say balloons.
It is a funny image. There are funny, interesting books from around this, like sort of science fiction books. I had this one called "Imagining the Future" or something like that, and science fiction from a certain pre 1950s or something like that is always kind of fascinating because you see how they imagine the future.
I mean, Day of the Triffids was quite good in the sense that it predicted things like satellites and but rather than nuclear weapons, it was focused on biological warfare.
That was a good one.
Yeah, Day of the Triffids, I still think is like if it does fall into the category of pulp, then it's like a premier pulp novel. But go back to Wells. A lot of what he wrote, none of it was as fantastical as as a lot of other contemporary authors. I think at the time, quite a lot of his stuff was still quite grounded. Or at least what I've read. Obviously, exception of War of the Worlds, maybe, but something like The Time Machine is not too technologically motivated, I suppose. It's more like a societal structure, and then in some of his short stories as well, it is sort of it doesn't go into this kind of 50s utopian sci-fi that we see. So yeah, that kind of turn of the century sci-fi was really interesting. So carry on. Yes, so this is the hide that they have. So this kind of goes to where his strong points are in some of the descriptions of nature. He does seem to be fairly well written when it comes to these kind of descriptions in this section of the novel, and if he stuck to that, I think I'd appreciate him a lot more. We will just carry on full steam ahead. I may have misjudged how long this PDF is because I thought it was only 200 pages, but maybe not. So this is the transformation that our protagonist goes through to become an infiltrator of the oligarchy.
Well, they all do, don't they? Essentially, they're all all the main characters are kind of double agents.
Yeah, and again, I was kind of reminded of hypernormalization. Speaking of Adam Curtis, is it Dugan that everything is sort of misdirection and you never really know who is? I mean, it's not written about in that way, but the idea that you've got essentially all of the proles infiltrating the oligarchy, but then all of the military is infiltrating, and you've got mercenaries that are infiltrating both sides. And you've got the oligarchy infiltrating the proletariats. It seems like, although it's not written about, it's written with crystal clear. These are the good. These are the good. These are the bad. If you're actually in that situation, you would have no idea whether you're coming or going.
In the end, the oligarchy is infiltrating itself. That's the only way it can end.
Yeah, I suppose they haven't really got kind of passion on their side. The oligarchy, they're all mercenaries, aren't they? They're all paid for soldiers. So it's hard to get kind of a loyalty going.
We can skip through. Obviously, anyone tell me if they want to make any points, but I do feel like we're sort of just wrapping up on just some minor points when it comes to the end of this. Oh, we can talk about the Red Virgin when we get to her. This is also a interesting quote as well. It's far easier to see brave men die than to hear a coward beg for life. But that quote just stuck out to me. I thought it was.
It's less cringy, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So this is the lost oligarch that we're talking about when they Alex him, Alex boy him.
Alex boy.
Yes.
Yes. Not been attending, have we? Yes. There's nothing wrong with that man. He looks like a typical Englishman.
He does. He sounds like one as well. Skipping along. So they capture this child of the oligarchy. Move on to this.
The roaring abysmal beast.
Mhm. Yeah, there's a certain underclass which even London doesn't want to be associated with, which we find when we get to the Chicago Commune. Here we are.
The Paris Commune. Oh, Chicago Commune.
Yes.
Did you hear that about the Paris Commune? That the guy was supposed to defend it. He had a bunch of cannons, and he was so inept at being military that when the real military showed up, they just basically took it with ease. Because apparently, militarying is a skill.
Trained soldiers. Yeah, what was it? They were talking about the other day, and that quote from 300 just came into my head. You know the film.
Mm-hmm.
How many soldiers did you bring? You know, after he's asked them what their professions are, and they're just like, I am a joiner, I am a butcher, I am a baker.
I'm a poet.
And so, what are you? You know,
I'm a
we're
social
soldiers. Yeah.
Reminds me of those early clashes between the Proud Boys and Antifa, where the Proud Boys are all these hulky men, and then they basically one punch everybody. Oh.
Yeah, they run out of bike locks.
Yeah, that was a professor, wasn't it? Like
yeah,
Yep.
the bike lock one, yeah.
An educator.
So it was an educator or agitator.
They look like the Virgin and the Chad memes.
So this is the train journey that they take to get to Chicago. And should we cover Chicago? There's not really a particular quote that I think we can use to go through it. Any points that people want to make on the Chicago Commune? What I was talking about earlier was, that morality kind of goes out the window, and there's just subversion and counter subversion, and we find that the conflict arises from the proletariats intentionally stoking up tensions between the mercenary forces in Chicago and the sort of underclass of Chicago. But it's completely justified. It's not even hinted at that it might be morally dubious to do that.
Oh, I mean, it's all justified. It's all okay. Why wouldn't it be? I mean, it's for the greater good. That's why it's all in these our brave comets are coming, and we are going to be victorious. And is there anywhere in this document anything where they kind of describe that the mercenaries are actually human and what their reasons are, or are they just like cardboard villains to be shot at?
Well, to answer that, the page I've just gone onto, but the mercenaries were not content with what they had done. They invaded the entrance, killing the wounded and searching out the unhurt that, like ourselves, were playing dead. I remember one man they dragged out of a heap who pleaded abjectly until a revolver cut him short. Then there was a woman who charged from a heap, snarling and shooting. She fired 6 shots before they got her, though what damage she did we could not know. We followed these tragedies only by sound. Yeah, to answer your question, no, they're not human. They are another group of people that we can't mention.
Can I mention? Can I buy a consonant or?
You can buy 2 consonants and two vowels. Yes. So I think
when it's describing the people of the commune, it doesn't really describe them very favourably either, does it? In terms of their appearances.
No, that's what I mean. There seems to be an underclass that he separates from the proletariat because he just describes them as these almost zombie-like figures where they're just rags and bones that are just filled with hatred and want to tear everyone apart.
So the look of them as well. There's like a look like they're all very ugly and decrepit.
Aren't handsome like Ernest.
No, they haven't.
What you're saying is they have thin necks.
No, I'm just saying they're ugly. They ain't got no alibi.
Right, let's see if we can get to the end of this. I don't think there's any other points, but good.
Well, the end of the book is quite good.
There.
The end of the book is quite good. It's quite high octane, and there's a bit of stuff going on. It's
sort of the exact opposite of the commentary, because we started off full of vigor and plenty to say, and now it's just falling into a whimper. Whereas in the book, it starts off incredibly dull and does end with at least some action, something happening. Not every book needs something to happen. If you but this sort of writing does.
Yeah, I think the most realistic thing about the book is kind of like the techniques that were used by the various factions to, subvert and persuade and, disrupt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree.
A lot of which, were used by, the various factions in between certain wars and in certain places.
Yeah, and we get an idealization of terrorists as well, which again we see rearing its head. So this is where it's cut off on this edition. So yeah, unless there's any other points, let's just kind of wrap it up in general here. That last 10-20 minutes it was kind of just flicking through, but it kind of the whole reason I wanted to take the text as opposed to analyze it from an outside view as we normally do is that the vast majority of the first 2/3 are not written as fiction. They're written as a speech. He just stands on a soapbox and preaches. So that's why it's easier to kind of address the points made that way. Whereas later on, it does become a bit more of a standard narrative, and so that's why there's not a great deal to cover when it comes to the actual action. So,
I mean, it's a very didactic book. So
yes,
kind of
just Yes, so sorry to interrupt. Just say you can carry on that.
Just, I mean, I think we responded to it as such for the most part. As you know, it's a teachy kind of preachy book, which celebrates an ideology that we don't especially like.
So the whole thing was basically a prediction, wasn't it? It was kind of a guess prediction of where the kind of this whole corporate kind of thing that was starting to emerge, from the Industrial Revolution, where it could go, if left unchecked. More than I don't know, more than promoting it. I don't know. Obviously, Ernest promotes it, but it's kind of more of a like a cautionary tale, I suppose, of where something could lead if you don't pay attention. In the sense of the oligarch and
it's kind of a strange read in that it's written just before a series of kind of communist revolutions and experiments, and which went a lot. Things turned out a lot differently than Jack London seemed to imagine.
I think that might be the most interesting part of it, is when it's written and what perspectives it offers because of the time period it was written.
I mean, he kind of predicted World War I, didn't he? But it was Germany versus America.
Yeah. So
and like I say, the tactics employed by all these different sides are all quite realistic as well. Whether that's just because that's just how things are, I don't know.
Well, yeah, that would be where I'd lean towards. Is it might just be a function of maintaining power, the censorship. But it's well portrayed. But yeah, let's do some final thoughts, if there are any, of anything that we haven't brought up. We've kind of torn it to shreds.
If anything, this book has made me a monarchist.
Yeah, I get that.
And the reason for that. I was
going to say, my only disappointment is that you weren't there already.
No. I already was a monarchist, but the reason for that is that basically it shows, okay, there's a certain status quo. It's not ideal. People want to change that, but then they lay the blame on, for example, Rockefeller, who is somebody who is not from a traditionally a ruling group. So he transcended the caste barriers, as it is, or the social social stratum, and he employs tactics which are using the Pinkertons, which could be considered lowbrow. They're not really diplomatic, so they're quite violent. And you see, as a reaction, is more lower class people doing violence. So if anything, you need a ruling class that actually knows how to moderate everything and how to make people actually cooperate in a certain way, because in the end that will be a more desirable state, because most people will be better off, given the fact that the result in this book is that everybody's just shooting at each other and killing each other, and it takes a couple of hundred of years to settle stuff down. I don't call that an ideal situation. So that's my take on it. So yeah, it's a nice horror story. I think it fits in the same line as Frankenstein.
Right.
Yeah, well, it kind of feels quite with the exception of the ending, it feels very Frankenstein-y.
You mean the long discourses, like the monster in Frankenstein?
Yeah, just that, and just, I don't know, it's the feel of it. I don't know, just especially with like the bit on the farm and or not the farm, and just, I don't know, yeah, just the feel of it, just generally.
Frankenstein is far better written, I think.
Yeah.
Do you think?
I think so.
Yeah,
there's more poetry in the prose.
I think that also that Mary Shelley has a better understanding of how people actually learn stuff, and also she doesn't have this like this. I don't, we were talking about a Noel Savage with that book, but but yeah, he's like of the perfect man, but he's not ideal, as in that people just reject him, and then the result is that he's corrupted by society in some way, but yeah.
You also have the excuse that she's a teenage love-struck girl that's, liaising with a poet. So you can forgive her some of those idyllic moments, whereas Jack London really should have had his head screwed on by now.
Yeah, well, you've got one that's written by a young woman, from the perspective of a youngish man, versus a story that's by I don't know how old he was when he wrote this, but writing from the perspective of a young woman.
It's fairly late into his career, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, so you got
I think he'd been writing for at least a decade.
Yeah, you got an oldish guy writing about from the perspective of a young woman versus the opposite.
I think. Sorry,
these characters just do not have any life for me.
Yeah. And neither author knows what the other sex finds appealing about their own sex, because there's just this strange, as we covered before, homoerotic tone to some of the to some of the descriptions in Frankenstein, and in this, Ernest's neck is his most attractive feature. So I don't know. Maybe people should stick. Maybe not exclusively, but figure out what the hell you're talking about before you write in the perspective of the opposite gender. Maybe
stay in your lane.
I think it's a shame that people take this book as a blueprint on how to do stuff, because they assume that the perspective from which the book is read. So the guy making the footnotes is the desirable state, and that you will get there. But what it describes is basically the first step. You make a lot of fuss and you start a revolution. Then you have a lot of unknowns, a lot of question marks, and at the end you have profit. So this is basically the underpants no memes. What's going on? But they think, well, if we start like this, then of course we'll end in a desirable solution. So we just have to fight all those evil guys, those people who made money.
Yeah, and look at what we've already done. We haven't covered 1984, but I think we've all read it. We've covered Brave New World, which is far more fantastical in some of the ideas, but it's far more grounded, and that's what makes it. That's what makes it so good. Is that at first glance it appears completely alien, but through Huxley's writing, you realize that actually we're not too distant from this after all, and it might be closer than we like to admit. That's why it's such an excellent dystopian novel. You can say exactly the same thing with 1984. I think people are probably a little bit more accepting of 1984 as being a comparison to the modern world. Even with Animal Farm, obviously it's allegorical to a certain time and a certain events, but we can draw the comparisons. With this, it's just missing that element of being able to really say, yeah, I understand what you're saying, and I understand the comparisons being drawn, because I think none of the others are preachy. They're all written as a novel first, and sort of a political essay second. Whereas this, what the original intention was.
If you look at 1984 and even A Brave New World, there's no straw manning going on. They basically say, well, the world is like this, and you have somebody living there and struggling, but it's not that. In 1984, you have Winston who's wearing a top hat and is telling the proles to get out of the sidewalk. And then suddenly somebody shows up telling him, no, it's wrong, and what you should actually realize, we've always been at war with Eurasia. The book is nothing like that. You have this world which is this dystopia, this result of some political regime, and you slowly discover why it works like that. And that's completely different from this, which is basically somebody who's an activist telling you you're wrong, and and somehow miraculously he gets his way and things go tits up.
I mean,
Yeah,
what you could argue, sorry, just to say, is that
Yeah.
everything else is well, Animal Farm is a little bit different because of what it is. But with 1984 and Brave New World, they're both post dystopia event. You know, they're both written whilst the regime is in charge, where maybe you could say that this is during one regime and the transferal to a new one. So
yeah, and it's a prediction as well, though, isn't it? It's a prediction of where the regime will go.
Yeah, so I can understand
left on the course.
I can understand why it'd be slightly different, but even still, I mean, they're just, it's night and day reading Brave New World and this. It's no comparison.
Yeah, it's obviously why. I mean, you know, it's like 1984 is in the minds of a lot of people, whereas Brave New World isn't really, and this even less so.
Yeah, well, thank God. I'm very glad that not more people know about this, because I think that there would be people that try and use this as promotional material for progressivism, I suppose. But
the thing is, the corporate, you know, oligarchs that are being villainized in this aren't the people, you know, the kind of people who'd be railing against it, you know, are fully on board, you know, and these new tech oligarchs are fully on board with that. With, you know, they'd be fully on board with this story. They'd hire Ernest as their media man, wouldn't they? I mean,
oh no, I agree. But let's wrap up. Let's wrap up. I think we've done our sentence. We've done our time. We're allowed to leave now. No more talk. Let's erase the iron heel from our memory and never speak of this again.
Pick up the iron heel.
it's a cautionary tale.
This is not a cautionary tale. This is fan fiction.
No, I mean, us reading the book.
Yeah, it's a cautionary tale of why you should always read a synopsis and not just trust lists of dystopian fiction. Anyway, let's wrap up. Tomorrow we're going to be doing a stream on the death penalty, and the next book that we're going to be covering in a couple of weeks' time is going to be The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, to have a break away from this drivel and read some Heinlein and get some decent fiction in our veins. Any final thoughts, or can we wrap up?
Wrap up.
Yes, I like the sound of that. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you for watching.
Goodbye.
Good night. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
See you next time. Bye-bye.